Welcome back to MOMnation Unscripted. Now, a word from our sponsor.
The best way for a mom in business to make the biggest impact online without living online is by designing her business to provide an experience that works with who she is at her core. That's why I created the Brand Experience Identity Quiz to help you find your brand's personality so you can create the best business for you and your family first. You can take it at brandingwithbeth.com/BEI quiz. And I'll see you inside the BizMom Mastermind here in MOMnation.
And we are live.
Hey!
Look at that. Hey, Katie.
Hey. Episode 13.
Of
Oh my
season
gosh.
3.
Mm-hmm.
Look at us.
It's funny we don't age ever, though. You know?
Yes. It's actually my ring light, but thank you. I'll take it. So.
Don't tell your secret.
Oh, I mean, thank you. That's all. How has your week been?
What did I do? Oh my gosh. So work schmirk, right? It's been busy. We all know that. We know I work 900 hours a day. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I did escape to the boat. So this is my new obsession. This is all you're going to hear about. So whenever you ask me, like, this is going to be your answer pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to the boat Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night. Actually, Sunday during the day, a little bit. So it was really cool. We are feeling like it's getting cooler, like cold-wise. And so, we're getting in our last-minute tubing and all of that. And so eventually it'll just be cruising and fishing instead of cruising, fishing, swimming, tubing.
Hey, that's super exciting, though.
That,
you're in your happy place.
Aside from music, the second my ass hits the seat on the boat, and it's just, you could smell the nature, and it's really clear. The air is super clear, and it's like, you know that water smell and kind of a little bit of boat gas? I like it. So it's just, everything just goes, and my phone doesn't work on the lake.
That is the best feeling right there.
Bonus. Not that I don't love y'all, but mama needs a break sometimes.
Seriously. That's why I love to be like off the grid in the middle of the woods where no one can reach me. That is the best feeling. Oh my gosh.
So I have to ask, because I have been watching crime shows lately. I don't know who got me hooked on this, but somebody did.
I don't know either.
So when you're like out in the middle of nowhere, because you watch so much crime stuff, do you get like all paranoid? Like, oh my God, somebody could totally do the deed right now. No one would ever hear me scream. Like,
I actually worry more in the city, because all of the stuff I've watched, it always happens in the city, and then they get taken in the woods, right? Like, it's not like they go looking in the woods for somebody.
That's true.
Most of the time they take somebody from the city, take them to a second location in the woods. Otherwise, people will be looking in the woods for that person.
That's true. Well, so, that's a good point. Because it made me think, because I'm, I think it was like Saturday night or one of those nights, and I had to go to the bathroom. And so we had to dock in order for me to go to the bathroom. And so I just ran up the hill to the little public bathrooms at the marina. And all of a sudden it was like dead quiet and pitch dark, and there's nobody around. And then there's this big lake next to me, and I'm thinking to myself, they could just do it and dump me in the lake. Nobody would ever know.
There's this true crime story that I heard, and it was this woman who, she had somebody come in her house and attack her, and she actually ended up killing the guy defending herself. But she didn't have any weapons. She did it with her body. And so, like, ever since then, I'm always really aware when I'm in any space. I'm like, okay, I can see all of these things being weapons, and how can I use my body as a weapon if that should become necessary? So anyway, that's how far my true crime obsession goes.
Oh, the things we think about. And here Annette is sitting, and she's like, well, I have real live cases that probably do the same thing to her.
Right?
Yeah.
Some actual criminal cases on her docket, I'm sure. I'm sure that do you have to deal with the criminal side of it, though?
Sometimes, and I started out being a criminal defense attorney, so I have definitely ventured down that road. But yeah, we get divorces that have a mix of allegations like child abuse. Of course, domestic violence is a big issue that comes up, but yeah.
So how did you make that switch? So just for everybody who's listening, Annette is a attorney. And you're a divorce attorney, correct?
Right.
And
so I originally did criminal defense, and then I also had a contract where it's called being guardian ad litem, which is really like best interest attorney. And so I got interested in family law because as a best interest attorney, part of your job is to actually meet with the kids, meet with both parties, try to help figure out what would really be best for the family. And so now working on family law and approaching my cases, I try to kind of incorporate that perspective. And of course, that's what the judges always want to know is what is in the best interest of the kids. And if we can make an argument that focuses on that and really kind of delivers that perspective, I think we have we have a better chance of getting a good outcome. So
did you have a particular case that made you switch from being a criminal defense attorney to divorce?
Well, I actually had a criminal defense case that made me want to switch to being a divorce attorney because it was a situation where the defendant had a really good deal. He had some priors that we had to allege, and it was a child abuse case. And I just found I couldn't help him. I couldn't find a way to convince him to be rational. And then, you know, I don't appreciate being yelled at. So that was a turning point case for me where I was like, you know, I think I'm better at approaching families. I'm better at working with parents, and, you know, being a parent myself, I get it. So that's really where I decided, nope, I want to go into family law and really focus more on that.
Wow. So Katie and I, we've had this discussion with all of our girlfriends 1,000 times since COVID began of like, oh Lordy, we're lucky to make it. If we make it through COVID still married, like it will be a miracle.
Miraculous.
A miracle among miracles. And that was back when we thought it was just going to be a few weeks, right? And we know now that COVID has brought a lot of cases where couples, they realize that they don't want to be together. It's brought that to the forefront. And so are you seeing an increase of divorce cases right now?
Absolutely. I think that people that were maybe on the fence before are now at the point where they want to pull the trigger on a divorce. And so we are getting so many calls per day. We have so many people retaining. You know, I have even friends and past colleagues, you know, other people that I've had connections with that I've known that are now reaching out saying, hey, I need information about getting a divorce. So it's, I think just people having to deal with such a significant experience like COVID, like how do you manage online school now? That's a whole new stressor added into the household. And then how do you manage potential layoffs or furloughs? That's another financial stressor. I think all of those have pushed marriages to the brink. And so if they were already having issues, now it's just like, okay, we're ready to move on. So yeah, we've had a really busy time. I've had to hire more staff.
And has it come in, I'm just so curious right now, has it come in waves or has it just been really steady since COVID began?
I would say, I think we had a kind of a deluge right when that first stay-at-home order was lifted. And, we had just like a huge influx of calls. And so it was a matter of like just trying to get people in and accommodate doing consultations with them. But now that I think, people are starting to get into a routine and they're kind of either getting back to school or getting back to work, now it's more steady, I would say. Yeah, so I think it's leveled off a bit.
So interesting. Okay, I'm going to let Katie ask some questions because otherwise I'm just going to ask you 97 questions.
Which is fine. I knew you were going to love this guest. So I'm like, I'll just sit all
intrigued.
over here on mute because I know Beth is going to run with it. But what comes to me, or what comes to my mind is, first question, so two-part. First question, why do people tend to get divorced? Like, what are the most common reasons that you see? And are those still the same reasons during COVID, or has it changed?
So I would say it's probably maybe three reasons. One is some sort of like emotional disconnect. And I don't know what the label for that would be, but I think it's where communication has broken down, where, they're not on the same page about goals or values. So I think that's one big issue. The other issue would be finances. I think that's just a huge weight, like either how do you manage finances or what do you do when you don't have money and you're strapped, your family is struggling. And then I think the third reason is infidelity. And I would probably say that the first two reasons have increased. Infidelity is potentially a byproduct of the other two issues, but I see definitely the communication and kind of that emotional connection being one of the biggest reasons I think right now that people are seeking to get a divorce. So.
Are you seeing an increase in domestic violence?
So, I don't have the stats on it. And I have seen, sadly, I haven't actually seen an increase in domestic violence. What I've actually seen, and I'm just speaking to my own caseload, is more of an increase in like child abuse allegations. And I was trying to find some statistics, and what I actually found yesterday is that at least in the state of New York, there has actually been a decline in child abuse reports by 50%. And so there's a concern that because kids aren't going out in the public, they're not going to school where teachers can see them and observe them, that there are a lot of child abuse cases right now that are actually going unreported.
There have to be, just because I know every mom I talk to, like they are even more at their max, right? They are so at their max. And so since there's nobody, that's terrible.
Yeah, it's really concerning. So, I mean, personally, the sooner we can have the kids safely return to school, probably the better, from, looking at it with the child abuse issue in mind, because teachers are the ones who make a lot of reports to the Department of Child Safety. Doctors and pediatricians make reports, and counselors do. And if they're not able to have that like face time and be able to see, like, are the kids getting fed or are they still hungry today? Kids aren't getting the help that they necessarily need.
So in that case, how can neighbors and, how can we help if we suspect something is happening, like with a neighbor or, with a child's friend? If we just have suspicions, like what is the best way for just a normal citizen to help that child?
So you can actually make an anonymous report to DCS. I want to say it's like 1-800-SOS-CHILD. I'm not 100% sure that's the number, but they do have a hotline where you can call and you can request to be anonymous. And DCS is supposed to follow up and investigate any allegation that's made. they'll of course prioritize based on the level of the concern, but that would be one way that even a stranger who observes a child could actually make a report if they had a concern.
Okay, fascinating. I'm curious, are you finding people who, I don't know, I'm sure you find this in general anyway, but are you finding an increase of people who start the process of a divorce and then back out, or, you know, back up the process?
Well, I have had a few people come in and say, I'm ready to file. And then, you know, we draft the paperwork, we send it to them to review, and then I don't hear anything back. So I guess I would say I've had an increase in people like that, but it's probably still the same rate just because we're taking more cases and we have a higher caseload. I think, of course, we're going to have a few more that are maybe reluctant when they finally see everything in writing. But yeah, we're getting a lot of people who are just ready to initiate the process and get it going.
Fascinating. And I know that I had talked to Katie, I don't know, a year ago or so, and she had told me that you had told her about how there's always an increase of divorces in January. And so I'm curious, do you think that you're going to see an even higher rate of that in January than normal after everybody gets through the holidays? Just completely speculation here. What do you think?
I would bet that it would be, because I think anyone that's really holding out, hoping, you know, for things to improve and return to normal, I think they're probably looking at the holidays as sort of like that cutoff. And if maybe their family life doesn't, or their marriage doesn't really meet with their expectations, I think they would be prepared at that point to move forward. But it is speculation. I'm guessing. I see trends just based on, you know, the holidays, even potentially in April when everyone starts getting their tax refunds. We usually see an increase because then people have the funds to actually file for divorce. So those are definitely the periods that we see increases.
Fascinating. So I'm curious about if a mom is in a situation where she's starting to have that thought process of, I don't know if I can keep doing this anymore, and I think I'm done. Where do they even start?
Well, I think a good starting point is actually to look at resources online, and I would steer clear of a lot of the blogs because the advice is just going to be so dependent upon each person's individual facts and, you know, who's involved and what assets are at stake. So I would look really at trying to get a handle on what's the process. So whatever local court you're in, so here in Arizona, it would be Maricopa County or Pinal County. Look online and see what resources are available there, because Maricopa County, for example, has a lot available. You can get all of the packets that you need for filing. And even when I talk to people, I usually say, hey, look at the self-service center, because if you can tackle the forms on your own, you can always have an attorney step in down the road. But I think a starting point would be to look at what's required to file, look at what the issues are that you're going to have to address, and try to get an understanding about what those terms mean, and talk to an attorney. A lot of us do free consults. We do at Cox Sandoval Law. We offer a free half-hour consultation. So, you know, definitely take us up on the free consultation, because you can get a lot of general information and get a lot of your even more specific questions answered. And that, I think, would give someone a good kind of basis for determining, like, okay, I can file on my own now, or no, I really need the help of an attorney.
And one of the things that I've always heard over the years is, if you think that you're going to need to go to court, like, start tracking things, start documenting everything. Is that something that moms need to be aware of as they're starting to make this decision?
Well, I think it's a good idea because if you have access to accounts today and you file for divorce, suddenly, if it was a joint account, you may not have access to it after that petition has been filed. So it's a good idea to print out tax returns, W-2s. If you have access to pay stubs for both parties, print those out. Bank statements, credit card statements, all of those things are really handy to have. I usually suggest to my clients that if you're not comfortable just making a copy of these documents, then put it on a thumb drive and then put that thumb drive in a secure location. Give it to a friend to keep if need be. Because if you don't have access to those records once we file, we can always ask for them and we can issue subpoenas. We can do a motion to compel, but it takes a lot of work, which means a lot of legal fees to get to that point. And if you had them to begin with, it would be easier. Some people don't have access to those records though, and then that's where we really have to step in and do a request to produce documents, and then potentially follow up with subpoenas. So.
And if somebody has these documents that show, you know, like the financials and that sort of thing, how does that impact child support and alimony and those types of things?
So spousal maintenance is something that is kind of vague, and it's a nebulous idea here in Arizona, because there's no actual formula for it. It's not like child support where there's a calculator and you can plug in numbers. We can do a calculation that shows us a basic range, but really for spousal maintenance, it depends on so many factors in each individual mom's situation. You first have to show whether you're entitled to it. And so things that the court will look at to make that determination would be, is it a long-term marriage? Did mom make any sacrifices to the benefit of the community? Did she help put dad through school, or did she somehow sacrifice her career so that dad could advance in his career? If those questions are answered yes, then the second part of figuring out spousal maintenance is, you know, well, how much and for how long should mom get spousal maintenance? And that's discretionary. It's up to the judge that you get. And so that's one of the things I ask is, okay, do you know who your judge is? Because I can always put out feelers with colleagues, or maybe I've done a spousal maintenance trial in front of them. So I'll be able to get an idea of, okay, here's what you can expect with the judge. But that's spousal maintenance. And so it's a little bit different than, say, child support, where we do have a calculation and we plug in gross income for dad. We plug in gross income for mom. If mom isn't working, the court will attribute at least minimum wage, because there is an expectation that a parent can go out and work at least full-time at minimum wage. And then the person that gets, or that is paying health insurance, would get a credit for the cost. And the parenting time allocation gets inputted, and that tells us a number. So child support is a little bit more black and white compared to, say, spousal support, because it isn't discretionary. It's not really up to a judge to decide child support. They have to apply the calculation and the child support guidelines.
So walk us through a day in the life of consultations with Annette. Like, what is a normal consultation like? So let's just say I come and see you and I'm like, look, enough's enough, and we have our 30-minute. How does that go?
So I usually start out by asking if a client has any specific questions, because sometimes they have like this burning question, like, I've already done my research. I already know, here's what my friends say. Here's what I've read on this blog, but I need to know this. So I always want to try to address whatever those concerns are right off the bat if I can. And then other times clients will just say, or potential clients will say, I don't know anything. I haven't really done a lot of research. I'll offer to just walk them through the process. And so that's usually how I start my consultation. And then that's what I do. I just start talking to them about the process and how you go about filing. What does it take do the petition, what goes into the initial petition, and then from there, how do you take care of service? What are the options for service?
In terms of cost, I know the consultation is free. Is the cost, does it just depend on how much, like what's going on in terms of your fee? Like how is that determined?
Well, it does unfortunately depend, because some cases people will come and they'll say, hey, I've already sat down with my husband and here's what we want to do. You know, in situations like that, I can potentially even offer a flat fee if it's just a matter of drafting documents. Other times I have someone come to me and they say, hey, you know, he just took all the money out of the bank account. We need to file for a restraining order on Wells Fargo, and I'm afraid of this abuse allegation. If we're doing an emergency filing, that's going to change the cost as well, just because there's more work involved kind of on the front end of the case. Our standard retainer, I can say, just is usually around $3,500 to start a case, and I try to start a little bit lower. I think that's maybe an average to lower range for a retainer, just because it helps people get the case started. And I think sometimes that's as important, just making sure that they get everything off to a good start, getting everything filed, kind of handling that sort of, I think sometimes it can be an overwhelming process, and it takes that pressure off of people. So at least that part is done.
So I know that a lot of moms, when they are in the process of deciding whether to leave, whether to stay, that sort of thing, they are thinking about like, well, then what am I going to do? Am I going to go like leave my nice house and go live in a tiny little dumpy apartment, and I have no money, and how am I going to take care of my kids? What kinds of resources or what should a mom know about what options exist for her as she is leaving?
Well, I think that's where, you know, she has to make a personal decision as to whether to stay or go. But undoubtedly, there is a bit of a financial hit to both parties when you go through a divorce, because you have to think you're taking the income that was supporting just one household, and now you're expecting that income is now going to support two households. So there usually is some kind of decline in either lifestyle or being able to meet needs, but that's also where mom needs to consider, how does she protect herself? Do I take half out of a bank account at the time of filing just to secure at least half of whatever was in the bank account? Or do you really try to openly talk with the primary breadwinner? Do you try to talk to that person to get an agreement about, okay, we need to separate, let's be practical about this, we're going to have bills to pay, how do we do that? So a lot of it depends on how comfortable the parties are in talking about those things, and even just, I guess, how much there is to go around. But going through a divorce is definitely difficult, both emotionally and financially, and it's something that if it means they have to rely on their family, I will suggest that to my clients, because I would much rather see them stay with a family member or in more of a temporary housing situation than to be in a place where they're not safe. The other thing that I will suggest to potential clients is, if they can qualify, there is community legal services out there, and that is a free, it's a free service where they can actually have attorneys assigned to represent their case, but they do have to meet certain financial requirements, and they do have to be able to show that domestic violence was involved in their case. So there are certain requirements for that. And then other legal services are out there, where there's the Family Law Assistance Program, where attorneys will volunteer their time to help out. So it's possible to get some free legal support. but it's also possible to represent yourself so you can kind of save those costs.
So another thing that I've talked with moms about when it comes to the financial piece is getting equity, getting part of the equity out of your house. Is that something that they need to negotiate in the divorce?
Well, yes, absolutely. And I'm sure Katie knows all about that too. But part of what we have to do is when we're coming up with a final decree is we have to include what are we doing with the real property that's at stake. Is it being awarded to one person and that person is going to refinance it and buy out the other person's interest? Is it purely a sole and separate asset that was accrued or purchased prior to marriage and paid off, so the community made no contribution to it? So those are all the kind of facts that we need to know. And yes, absolutely, we negotiate that. If one person wants to keep the house, then the parties need to figure out, okay, do we have to do a refi? Do we have to do a cash out refi? Or are there other assets to buy out the other party's interest? And there was recent case law that came out that basically says it doesn't matter if it's titled just in one party's name, if there were no sole and separate capital contributions to the value of the home, and it was purchased during the marriage, but maybe just titled in one person's name, it's still a community asset. So all of the equity gets divided. So it's very fact dependent on, when was the house purchased, what was the source of funds used to purchase the home, and what's the value now. But yes, we absolutely would want to negotiate the equity portion and how much mom gets or dad gets, vice versa. So,
and when it comes to negotiating, are there some things that people should be negotiating that they never think of negotiating without an attorney telling them to?
That is a really interesting question. See, I haven't had negotiations where, I'm always the attorney that's involved, but I do see some things that come out of mediation where they didn't have counsel. And I would usually say, hey, if you're going to a private mediation and you don't want to pay for an attorney to go with you, at least have an attorney review the document before you sign it, because once you sign it, you're stuck. It's very hard to get out of. And there are some things where I see like, college tuition has to be paid and things like that. And what a person may not realize going into mediation is that's all well and good to agree that you're going to pay college tuition, but your circumstances might change by the time your kids are 18 and you may not even be able to afford it. So then you could arguably be in breach of a contract there. So, and that's not actually something that the family court would order. The family court loses jurisdiction over kids at the age of 18. So college tuition is never something that I would incorporate into an agreement unless both parties really, really wanted to do that. I was just going to mention like one other thing I think that people will want to include that is really hard to enforce these days is it's called right of first refusal. Like, well, if dad can't watch the kids during his parenting time, I want to be the one to watch the kids. And that's a very natural thing to want, especially as you're separating and you're having to kind of distance yourself and accept like, okay, I'm not going to see my kids every day necessarily. But the right of first refusal is not something that family courts right now like. They don't like to enforce it. It creates, in the long term, it creates a situation where there's a lot of micromanaging of each other's parenting time. Like, well, I know you left the kids with your girlfriend because you had to go to the grocery store. You should have left them with me. Those are things that if you're in mediation, you could easily agree to. but down the road, there will be enforcement issues. And so, that would be something to definitely talk with an attorney over.
It's so fascinating. Oh my gosh. So if somebody did do this DIY, didn't go to an attorney, didn't get it reviewed, and then they sign the papers, what can be done at that point?
So the question is it voluntary? Is that agreement really voluntary? And whoever wants to try and set it aside is going, I'm trying to remember, but I think I have it right, where whoever wants to set it aside or try to dismiss a portion of that agreement, they're going to be the ones that have the burden to show that somehow it wasn't voluntary. Like, I was under duress, or I was medicated and I was in the hospital under the influence of my medication when I signed. I mean, there are certain circumstances when you can unwind agreements, but it's very difficult to do. So before you sign anything, I would just make sure that you are 100% comfortable with whatever those terms are. So,
and if like the safety of the children becomes an issue, you have an agreement that dad gets X amount of time, and then it turns out that dad's now doing meth on a daily basis.
Right.
What do you do in that circumstance?
That's where you file an emergency motion and you actually ask to modify the orders. So you can, circumstances change, people lose jobs, so maybe child support has to change. If maybe you have to move because of work, and so your parenting time schedule might have to change. Or yes, dad is suddenly a drug addict and you want to protect the kids. There are reasons why you can modify orders. You just really have to be able to make an argument that there is a substantial and ongoing change in circumstance that's materially affecting the well-being of the kids. Drug use, I think, would definitely be one of those, where if you have proof of that in some way, I mean, maybe it's a Facebook post, maybe it's a 911 call because he almost overdosed. If it's something like that, you definitely should be filing an emergency motion and at least putting it in front of a court to help you.
And so you mentioned drugs would be, a good example of something to have one of these emergency motions over. Can you give us any other examples of what emergency motions might show up?
Sure. Suicide is a big one. Mental health. If someone is not treating their mental health issue, that would be a reason to pursue an emergency motion. If a child is in any way put in harm's way, that would be a reason as well. It doesn't necessarily mean that you would prevail on an emergency motion, but at least you're putting that issue forward, and you'll usually get a faster court date that way, even if the emergency is denied. So, and then at that point, the court can evaluate, okay, do we have to have supervised parenting time now? Do we need to have dad go to Taros to do an addiction assessment or something? That the court has things that it can order to help assess like what's really happening here. So mental health, usually domestic violence, drug addiction or alcohol addiction, those are the big ones, I think, that are kind of reasons to pursue emergency orders.
And I'd be willing to bet that those things are up during COVID too, like more so than what they used to be.
Oh yeah. And I think the access to resources, like the access to counseling and things like that, have definitely changed as well. So, people aren't necessarily getting the same help or being able to pursue help like they were. So yeah, I think it's all kind of a cycle where, there are these mental health issues or an addiction issue develops, and then it's impacting the marriage. So now they're filing for divorce, and then that's going to then impact potential parenting time orders too. So yeah.
And if something happens where like you get divorced and then your child is diagnosed with autism, your child's diagnosed with something that you might have friction or disagree on how it should be treated. Is that, I wouldn't imagine that's an emergency motion, but it would change probably some of the agreements that you originally made. So
right, I think it depends on the scenario, and you would want to consider modifying, either asking for maybe final say on whatever the issue is, or asking for sole legal decision making as to that issue. There are other judges who will simply decide that issue for you. I've seen it come out where, maybe one parent wants to put the child in counseling to help deal with some adjustment issues that the child is experiencing, and the other parent just doesn't want to respond at all. In situations like that, you can file and ask to at least have final say over choosing a counselor or getting counseling set up, because it's something that is impacting the child's well-being. And that's really the key. Is it can't just be like, I want to make this change because it's more convenient for me, or I want to as mom or dad. It really has to be something that is affecting the child.
So I'm going to switch gears on you just a quick little bit. Is anyone ever amicable? Like, do you ever work with couples that are like, oh no, we're cool, she's good, we're still good, we just need you to handle this?
I do, actually. And honestly, even the ones where it starts out a little rough or even really contentious, by the time we get to trial, everyone is usually like, hey, I want this done, they finally got the fight out, and so now they're ready to sit down and be realistic and compromise. So most cases do settle. Obviously, because I'm a lawyer, I'm getting ones that tend to be more contentious, but I do have people that come in and they're like, hey, I think we can reach agreements, we draft everything, we get it filed for them, and then surprisingly, the parties are negotiating behind the scenes, and in one particular case I can think of, what my client tells me, hey, here are our agreements, and the other client tells their attorney, hey, here are our agreements. They match. In a situation like that, it's great because everyone is on the same page. The parties actually, by settling, they have more buy-in to the orders that they're agreeing to, because they're the ones that created it. They are accepting the terms, versus a judge just saying, here's what it is. I see that there are more enforcement and compliance issues with orders that come from judges versus a mediated settlement agreement. Usually people, if they're compromising, there's some give and take, and they're willing to follow those agreements. So.
And I know, as I've watched some friends get divorced, that from the time that they decide and tell their partner, hey, we're getting a divorce, to when the divorce is actually finalized, it's a long time. How long is that period?
It can be long. As far as the statutes, there is a 60-day waiting period from the date of service of the petition. So that prolongs it in and of itself. But most cases can't be resolved within 60 days anyway. If there are kids at stake or any kind of financial assets, it will take a little bit of negotiation beyond the 60-day period. I would say on average, a case takes about 6 months to a year. It just depends on if you're having to go to trial, or are we having to do private mediation, or do we need to do some kind of settlement conference. So I think scheduling trial is probably going to be the longest type of case. If we're really looking at litigating to a final trial, it'll take a while.
That's a really good question, Beth. And that makes me think, so if it's, 6 months to a year's time before judgment and everything is happening, like, what happens in the meantime? Who gets to live in the house? Where are the kids? who gets control over the bank accounts? Like, how is that all figured out?
Well, and that's really on the parties to either talk about and reach an agreement, or you can file what's called a motion for temporary orders, and the court will set a hearing within 30 days on whatever those temporary orders issues are. So you can ask for exclusive use of the house in temporary orders. You can ask for joint legal decision-making or sole legal decision-making. You can ask for parenting time orders. There are a lot of things that you can do and ask that the court enter on a temporary basis, even down to like who pays what bill. But again, that would be like one more hearing on top of the normal divorce process. So to the extent that parties can talk about those issues and either kind of keep things going the way they are, or at least reach agreements on how it's going to change in the interim, they'll minimize litigation costs at least. But going is an option, yeah.
So when somebody comes into your office and they're having their consultation, what's the question that they should be asking you that they don't ask you?
That's a tough one. I think I guess the question I think people should really ask is, are my positions reasonable? Am I likely to prevail if I stick with these positions? Because I think people hear a lot from their friends, like, well, I got sole custody because of this, and this, or I have sole custody. I think if they have the insight to really evaluate, like, are my expectations reasonable? They're going to be a really good client to work with, because then I know, okay, they're open to evaluating positions and strategizing, both for settlement and for going to court. And they're open to hearing, like, hey, this is how the judge will likely rule on this issue, but we could also compromise here. I mean, I think it's important to understand that there are just so many moving parts in resolving a divorce case, that if you are stuck on it's going to be this way, only this way, it's going to be a really hard process to go through. So I think that would probably be the one, to ask.
That's so smart. I never would have thought of that in a million years, that you need to really choose which are the most important things so you can strategize what to let go of.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Very interesting. So I have another question for you. Do you have a certain COVID time process for your clients and for your consultations? Do they come into the office? If so, are there any special things that you're doing, or are you doing it via Zoom? How can people, especially if they're concerned about COVID, how can they still get the same amount of value from a meeting with you?
Right. We can do everything by Zoom. We offer that, but for the most part, everyone has simply been doing telephone consultations. So, I'm open to doing either. We don't have people coming into the office unless it's really a client who's already retained and maybe they're signing off on documents. We do ask that everyone that comes into the office that they wear a mask. But we've just kind of kept that to a minimum. And we're sort of mirroring what the courts are doing right now. The courts are doing everything by Zoom. I think only a few judges have actually returned to in-person hearings, maybe one or two out of Maricopa County that I know of. So I think until the courts really get back to full swing in-person hearings, we'll just keep doing telephonics, and we can do Zoom conferences. I've got a Zoom mediation scheduled soon. So it's been a change, definitely a change, but it's been working. So I think either Zoom or phone usually works, you know.
And I'm curious, for me, COVID, you know, it's been a mixed bag. Part of it's been so nice because I don't have to drive everywhere all the time and spend 12 hours a week in my car, wasting 12 hours a week in my car. Do you think that these Zoom consultations and that sort of thing will continue even after all this is over?
Well, I actually was offering phone conferences prior to COVID because I know it's convenient for people. So I think it'll continue. And I don't really see any reason to change. I'm happy, you know, once things kind of clear up and open up, to have people come into the office, because I love like interacting with people and having them see our office, you know, and have them get a feel for who I am as an attorney and an individual. But I think you can also do that over the phone too, and by Zoom, of course. So we'll keep offering it, I think, as an option.
Love it.
Yes. Well, Annette's pretty amazing, don't you think, Beth?
Yeah, I'm just so amazed. You just like rolled out so much good information. I literally like texted someone while I'm here. I'm like, you need to listen to this.
Right. Catch the replay, because there was a lot of information. Annette, you're amazing. Thank you so much. And Annette knows about the MOMmune, Beth.
Yeah, isn't this so perfect? And it just shows how necessary the MOMmune is.
It does.
My God.
So if it's okay that I share, hopefully it is, because I'm about to share it. But Annette was a single mom too for a time. So we had a meeting, gosh, time flies when you're having fun. So it was a couple of months ago, but she gave me some really great things to think about in terms of moving the MOMmune along. So she's going to partner up with us and give our mamas some, you know, she has her free consultation, but then if they obviously retain her, it's not free, but she'll be able to help our mamas along in that situation. So I think it's awesome. We did a post in MOMnation. I don't know if you guys saw it, was a couple of weeks ago or a week ago, whatever. And just asking the single moms of the group, like what if they could have had anything at their fingertips when they transitioned into becoming single moms, what would it be? And we looked at all of those, and the highest ones are like, you know, childcare, but attorney was really high up there. And, you know, having that advice from somebody that is trusted. And I mean, we've known Annette long enough that I think we could probably trust her.
I hope so. I hope so.
We know her. We got this. But anyway, we are so excited about the MOMmune. Things are moving forward. We are putting things together, and we just really need this podcast to get out there to all the ears of the wonderful mamas that need this information, or share this information with friends that need it. Annette, please, you know, obviously feel free to share it with your network of mamas as well. We are looking to gain some, I don't know, what are we looking for, Beth? We're looking to gain a nice wide audience so that we can push this MOMmune thing forward, because the wider the audience, the more the reach, the more the people that we need to know get connected with us.
And we really need you guys to help us do that by sharing it out, by telling your friends about it. When you have a friend who is going through a divorce, or you have a friend who has an autistic child like last week, that episode, or if you need some emotional or mental support. You know, we've had so many guests that have helped with so many different topics like that. Direct them to our podcast, because these episodes are designed for them. They're designed for moms, and they take into account all of the different moving parts we have in all of our lives. And we come here week after week. Katie and I, we have things that we could do instead, but we know we have so many things we could do instead. But we know that the guests that we're bringing to you guys every single week are handpicked to be able to help you guys with the issues that you have in your lives. So please, to listen to these episodes, share them, let your friends know that it exists, and encourage them to share it with their friends too.
Yes, 100%. And we are moms that live real life with real jobs and real challenges. So, I mean, Yeah, we have these same questions as well. I mean, it's funny because when we are talking about what guests to come, to invite to come onto the show, I'm always like, well, I kind of have this question, so let's do it. Let's do this topic and let's ask this guest. So, and I know you do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been so many times that you've messaged me and you've been like, well, who should we have on the show? And I'm like, well, you know what I could hear some really important information about.
So true.
Pick that guest. So
exactly. Well, Annette, thank you so much for being on with us. You have been wonderful. Thank you for sharing and opening up and just, opening our eyes to what actually happens when we decide enough's enough. So thank you.
Absolutely. You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.